Right, welcome back to the Consultancy Growth Podcast. I am very pleased to be hosting Tim Redgate in this session. Now, Tim, we've known each other for over 20 years now, but very, very occasionally got in contact. And I believe we both had more hair, and it was a slightly different colour back in those days.
It would mirror image today, actually.
Yeah, yes, some time ago. Welcome, Tim. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you as well, Joe. Yeah, obviously. Yeah, it is. It must be, I think it was around 2001 when we worked together.
Yep.
And obviously, since then, apart from losing lots of hair and getting grey beards, both gone on our separate journeys in starting our own businesses as well and things like that.
Yeah. So Tim, you've I've got you on especially to talk about sort of productization and developing software for boutiques, consulting firms, professional service firms. But before we jump to that, could you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So obviously, yeah. Well, after working together as we did at Three, before it was Three, the mobile company, immediately after that, I founded a digital agency. So in the days when it was, building Flash websites and that sort of thing. And then that very much moved on to a business that built lots of apps for mobile when that was the thing that everybody did. And then increasingly became very tech focused through that business. So building a lot of what I'd call sort of custom tech products, custom software for large enterprises, some startups and things like that. And really for the last 4 years, so post that business, that was about 15 years of that business. And then post that, I've been working as a advisor stroke fractional strategic lead for tech services businesses and tech product companies. So typically working with the end clients of those businesses tend to be often startups or businesses within businesses where they're trying to do something a little bit different that off the shelf isn't cookie cutter. So they require that degree of customization and custom engineering, really.
Okay, great, thank you. And I guess the firm that you're most heavily involved with now is Axioned. Could you tell us a little bit about what they do and what you do for them?
Yeah, so Axioned is a tech services business. So we're about 90 people, largely engineering focused. So, of the 90 people, 50 of those are engineers, software engineers. So very technically focused. And yeah, the reason I spend most of my time on that business really is that it very much is the delivery side of the strategy. So if we're talking to an end client about how they might take an idea to market and either create a new business or create a new their business, Axioned is very much about, and hence the name Axioned, it's about putting that into action and creating the thing, so beyond the strategy.
Okay, cool, thank you. Okay, so let's dive in a little bit to, I guess, what the listeners are going to be most interested in, which is around the sort of productization of people services, people knowledge, and that side of things. Now, before we get into how and what and why, I'd like to think a little bit strategically about it and get your view on this, because a lot of consultancy or boutique owners, agency owners, look at with great envy the margins and the valuations of SaaS companies. And they think, well, I should be doing SaaS. Now, I also know a lot of SaaS owners who look at consultancies and think, I could do with that predictable cash-heavy revenue coming in, and I could do without these big investors, jumping on my back every time I want to make a decision. So consultancies and other firms are thinking, and there's been a lot of this in the last 10 years, of the price of software development, and no code, low code has happened. it's a very difficult balance to get right strategically sometimes, unless you're doing just sort of because software is a very different thing to people. And I'm guessing strategically, the question I'd like to ask is strategically, how should the senior decision makers who are primarily focused on people and, client relationships and trust and all the people things that make consultancies work, how should they think about tech as a potential investment that they might make, alongside all the other potential investments that they might make, including hiring more people?
So there's obviously a few different lenses. Because I've personally been in that situation where I had a very people-led business. It was they were engineers, but effectively you're selling their time and as to end clients, and had that similar dilemma of it was a boutique business, so we were 20 people. So had some big clients, and it was a nice, predictable in lots of ways, but we knew that the multiple was never going to be exciting as a sort of service-based business. So had it in our heads that we would spin out, and we wanted to create a tech product. So that was a strategic decision based on exit. So if that's the end goal and that's the sort of bet that you're going to make, then that's the lens through which you view it, and therefore you're looking more as tech investment as a potential exit vehicle. But I think ultimately the thing that I see, obviously in consultancies, we see it in specialist agencies, there's subject matter expertise that exists within those businesses. That's usually the start point of the product idea. It's like, I do this, I know this subject intimately, and know it to great level of detail, and can spot an opportunity to productize. So that's one obvious space where the strategy would say, well, do we have enough knowledge? Have we got enough of a gauge of the market and enough of a gauge of whether this thing that we know is needed widely? Then there's clearly an opportunity. But there's also, I think, again, in a people-led business, and I've worked on this with an HR consultancy actually over the last couple of years, where they had a process and a product in terms of, it was a methodology and a framework through which they go and consult on company culture, basically. And in that situation, the initial driver for productizing was, it was really labor intensive. They were going out and having to do, face-to-face interviews across large businesses. They were gathering data together through a range of monkey surveys, pulling it all into spreadsheets, number crunching what they were finding, and then putting together these, big, long PowerPoint driven reports to go and then back to the client. And so there was just an obvious advantage to productizing aspects of that and automating aspects. Well, we don't need to go and have all those face-to-face interviews. We'll have the ones that matter, and we'll align our consultants with the high value strategic thinking. But all of that number crunching, all of that data gathering, all of that visualization of data is the stuff that can be done, instantly using tech. So there's, I think, you can view it through both lenses, and in terms of, one is do more with less. Small number of people, and therefore it's just an efficiency. And then the other is, there's a potential for a product that will have a life of its own, or will have its own value. And then sort of in between that, I suppose, with the extreme being, okay, we spin it out as a separate business, which interestingly that HR consultancy did do. You go that to the full extent of, okay, this is a SaaS platform, we're going to sell it and to companies and hopefully one day exit, versus the sort of the efficiency end. And then in the middle of that, I guess you've got, yes, efficiency and technology, but then the proprietary nature of the technology you might build is also about going, does it make us more sticky with our clients? So by having a tool and that system, is it just another value add on top of our traditional business that says actually this makes us sticky. It means that they're not going to necessarily go to another consultancy because on top of the knowledge and the people that we work with day to day, we've got this added value through the tech.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm putting myself in the position of a say a boutique owner, 50 to 100 people, and we're doing okay. We've got 22% margin, we've got reasonable growth, but I'm looking at these opportunities. One thing I have seen a lot as in an advisory position is decision or seniors leaders will start up a IT project or a SaaS project or some form of productization project, but they won't give it the attention or investment it deserves. And so it's kind of just done as another thing alongside their day-to-day work, and they will get a lot of their internal people working on it sometimes, and it won't be a priority. It's not driven. And my advice on this, and I'd love to know what you think, what your view would be, but my advice on this has always been to treat it as almost a separate investment. So whatever money, whatever profit you take as leaders in the firm, almost treat it as if someone had come up to you in the street and said, look, I've got this really sound investment idea, I've got a lot of internal knowledge, how about putting some money into this? And so you've almost got a separation, both sometimes physically of where the work is occurring, but also psychologically. It's an investment project that needs to be run with specialists and thought about as something separate rather than something that's done alongside, the day-to-day work. Because I've just certainly I've seen it go wrong a lot of times. What are your insights or feelings on how to think about these types of projects?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Having a separate investment, seen as a separate investment, is the right thing to do. I think even more important than that is to have a product owner.
Okay. Yep.
Business who it's their baby, and yep. I think I've seen that work with clients. I saw it work in our own instance. We had somebody that had come up with the idea, and we effectively backed it.
Yep.
So then you've got the investment, you carve out a team, ideally, and you yep. make it a priority, and you make that their day job.
Yep.
And then you've got this product owner that's got not only the time and the investment, but yep. they've also passion and the fire in their belly to do it. So it's not seen as a peripheral secondary thing. It's like going, you run with this.
Yes.
I would say that's what I've seen work. And also there's it doesn't have to be a massive investment, that first stage. It could be say, okay, yes. we're going to try and get to this point, and we've got 3 months to do it, and you set yourself those limits, and that it's not going to be perfect.
Yes.
That it's going to be creaky under the hood from a tech standpoint, but you want to get to a proof point, and then then make further investments. But I think if you set those guardrails and go, right, this is your budget, this is the team that are allocated to it, at least for a good chunk of their time, this is the product owner, gives it the best chance of being a success. Yeah.
I think those are really good points, and it's obviously, or maybe not obviously to some of the listeners, but you might what I have seen happen a few times is that a founder or leader will go out to they'll find a coder on Upwork and say, look, this is my idea. They'll get them to build it, and then they realize that they haven't really thought through the idea, and perhaps the person they've got isn't necessarily as dedicated as they would like. And it's a very easy way to burn through a lot of money if you're trying to get the perfect product initially. And I really like your point about going for a beta or an alpha before you launch anything.
I think that sort of that build it and they will come approach is expensive.
Yes.
and it's much higher risk.
Yes.
And we tried to launch, so from within my own agency, we tried to launch a few products over the years because we'd got it in our heads that we were going to do this. I was talking to someone about this the other day. So what started out as just being right, we need some ideas from within the business, and we wanted to find that sort of product owner, or we just knew that within our team there'd be more knowledge than just us as the sort of directors going strategically think about it. So we'd had a few false starts with things that we'd built that we thought would get traction. The thing that ultimately did work, and we took it out to market and did, it was very successful when it went to market. It was a video personalization platform. And we effectively built very, very early alpha version of this technology, almost to the point where we called it more of a feasibility study. It was a technical feasibility. Can we do this thing that we couldn't see being done anywhere else? And so we just put an engineer on it with a product owner sort of driving what the functionality should be. But it was a case of going, you've got a really short space of time. We maybe gave him 4 weeks.
Okay, wow.
And we got to the point where we had this feasible thing. We said, and it was a case of, we know it works because we've got it working. It's hanging together with all these different bits of technology. It's not massively scalable. I don't know how it will work at scale, but we know it works. And the first thing we did was we just put together a beautiful deck and went out to see some clients and said,
okay,
we presented it like it was ready. And the interest and the clamor that we got from showing this really early proof of concept convinced us to invest further. We effectively closed our first deal with a major film studio before it was built.
I think that's a wonderful lesson to so many times, especially when things have gone wrong. I have seen leaders say, I've got this great idea, and started to plow money into it. And then you ask the question, well, who have you spoken to? Who's going to sell this? What do the clients think? And they'll say, well, hold on. I'll get a prototype first. And you can end up spending, 50 grand on getting to prototype stage, and then realize that not only is no one interested, but you don't have a mechanism necessarily for selling it to the clients. I think that's a really important point. Okay, so let's get down to a bit more practical stuff. So if I'm a founder of so again, 50 to 70 person firm, primarily people based. I've got my CRM system. I've perhaps even got some software for managing projects, and my finances are all on Xero or Free Agent. What are the obvious things that I should be looking at in this day and age, especially since since there's been so many developments over the last 5 years? What should I be looking at in terms of either automation or software?
Well, automation, obviously there's lots of options out there that you can use from an enterprise level. Obviously you've got things like ServiceNow, which is like automated workflows. And if you're working more with sort of SaaS products within a boutique scenario, then you can use things like Zapier to make systems talk to each other to maybe streamline some of those processes and automate those. So I think there's definitely a case for, that's like that. I see that as kind of dipping your toe in the water before you then go and do something of. Well,
Tim, let me just pause you there for a second, because you've mentioned a couple of things there that I realise you're very familiar with. Some of our listeners may not be at the stage where they know what ServiceNow is, or even know what an automated workflow is. Sure. So could you just talk a little bit around how that might work? I've got this company. We do fairly standard projects. They're not necessarily standardized, but we're at the stage now where we've got 7 or 8 services that we typically offer clients, and our back office is all relatively standardized, not necessarily as polished as it might be. What might automated workflows offer?
So, I mean, if we think about, the simplest level, it's tools like Zapier, which effectively it's a sort of if this then that type.
Okay. Yep.
Coding. So, it's a no code platform, but with some business logic, you can say, well, if a really simple version of if we hit this date, then we trigger this this email out to a client for a reminder, or it might be for a payment or something like that. So it's very simple, if this then that, or it might be that you're taking data out of one system and putting it into a spreadsheet, so that you sort of do the number crunching. So those type of simple if this then that type statements, I think there's lots of systems out there that will allow you to do that. So automating just parts of the workflow. And certain elements will be ripe for automation. Certain elements will be, well, it's so nuanced that it's not right to do that, or it'd be much more complex to do that. Right, what's our simplest, lowest hanging fruit, that stuff that we do day in, day out, that I know I can automate because it's a repetitive task. That's always the first place we'd start, and it's also the first place we start when we're building out a product for a client. It's what's the simplest stuff. Then you can focus the engineering on the complex.
Okay, so let's take an example like I see a bid. I see an RFP that I like the look of, and there's a loose process that I've noticed. Over the years, it tends to be that I'll send it to Claire, who's a partner, and say, should we go for this? Claire sends it back and says yes. So I dig up some previous bid that I've sent in, draft it out, and then send it to a junior to finish. And then it might go 2 ways. We might send it to the budgeting and resourcing person to look at pricing and people, and then we might send it to some form of review process. That type of document flow, is that the type of thing that would work quite well with workflow automation?
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you think about like project management tools, they're very much built for that. So even things like Basecamp, which obviously is very well used in the sort of small software engineering environments, and usually in smaller agency environments, those will have you can effectively create templates. So what you're saying, so if I'm going to start up a new project, which an RFP response would be one of those. Say, well, here are the templates that happen around that, and so there'll be a template based on these are the tasks that need to be fulfilled. These are the people who meet those requirements, or sort of fulfill those tasks. And so that's just it's repeatable, and we know. And it might be that it's slightly different each time. So you go in and you have to tweak it. But you start with that. This is our process. And if on this occasion we're not going to send it to Claire, we're going to send it to John, then just go in and tweak that within your automated process. Okay.
Well, let's go a little bit further then and start talking about some productization of what we're doing. So there might be quite a few, 6 or 7 services that I say, offer to clients. And, if I think about the typical consultancy life cycle, there might be a bit of research that takes place, perhaps some interviews, and then those interviews get analyzed, and then perhaps I might have some form of draft design, which might be a process map or a workflow or a business case or whatever. And then there might be some form of presentation that comes out of that to the senior people. How do I go about thinking And I might have some data that comes off the back of that, and I might have data that perhaps goes across many clients that I haven't ever thought about looking at as a whole. Where do I start as a business owner thinking about productization when I have perhaps all these opportunities, but I perhaps don't know about them because I'm just used to dealing with people and people-based services?
Yeah, it's I guess there's those things that are some things that are repeatable.
Yep.
So common and across all consultancies that productizing almost doesn't make sense, because it's like, well, everybody's doing it.
Yep.
They've all got their own sort of way of doing it, and they're probably all automate, or many will be automating to a certain extent because it's so known. So then it's a case of, well, are we potentially productizing into an already crowded space?
Okay. Yeah.
Setting us something to, so doing that due diligence of, is anybody else doing this? Could I buy this?
Okay.
Could I buy this off the shelf, or could I buy it off the shelf with 3 or 4 different platforms?
Sure. Yeah.
That's always the first place to look. And even when you're productizing, because sometimes it could be a case that the product itself could be the way in which you pull together multiple services. And
sure. Yeah.
So yeah, you almost kind of have to break it down into its atomic parts.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a multi-stage process, some of which is data gathering, some of which is data presentation, some of which is recommendations. And so yeah, I think it's a case of, can I automate part of that journey?
Yep.
Which probably at worst makes me more efficient.
Sure.
At best gives me an angle for a product. I'm trying to think of a good example, because we've worked with a media agency in creating a platform that was very much based on predictions. So it's if you're about to go and spend money on a media campaign, it's like, how do we predict where that campaign's going? And it'll be based on things that have happened historically. Will give you a sense of which direction it's going. Are things going off track, on track? Are we doing better?
Okay.
And that is the data that you get historically is all there.
Yep.
But it's in different places, so you may be looking in different places for that information. Yep. As a human going in and actually looking at that, by spending some time doing that, you can get a sense of, okay, I can see this is going off track because our cost per acquisition is going up.
Sure.
But then where that's going to go and how you predict that with any degree of confidence,
yep,
will come down to some sort of algorithmic analysis. So say, okay, most likely to stay in this, and it's the further out it goes, the less likelihood it's going to happen. But so from that scenario, you can imagine how, using multiple systems, you could get to that point of finding out how a campaign is doing. And in that particular scenario, the advice that we gave to that client when they first came to us with the idea was, go away and do this on a spreadsheet.
Okay, right, yeah.
And you could piece together different systems. There was a way to get data out in a sort of aggregated fashion through a third-party service provider. It was relatively expensive, but not as expensive as building something yourself. So it's like, you have to pay them 3 months worth of license fee to learn. Then it's only cost you $1,000 versus tens of thousands of dollars.
Sure.
And you can start to see how a product would develop out of that, because you're still doing the heavy lifting. You're still having to interact with it. It's not automated. It's not truly automated, but it is elements of the journey are automated. So your data gathering becomes automated. So yeah, I think that's the first place to look, is what things can we do now, today?
Okay. Good. And just as you were talking, a lot of what you were saying made me think about reporting. So obviously, in a large professional service firm, you kind of have a cadence of reporting, and there's data coming from lots of different sources. But if you're in a boutique, and I've seen, I see this very, very often. In fact, a lot of boutiques, will have a spreadsheet here. They'll have a PDF coming from somewhere else. They'll have a semi-automated system that's generating some form of data, and the seniors spend a lot of time getting this data together, putting it in the right format, and then presenting it to the board. And the board might come back and say, well, actually, I want a bit more detail on this. What types of solutions are available there for the busy partner that has, or CEO that has responsibility for getting all this data from different places and presenting it relatively coherently to a board?
So, well, obviously you've got data visualization platforms like Microsoft's Power BI or Tableau and things like that, which obviously, are well used, especially in enterprise, well used to create those sort of data dashboards.
Sure.
I would say kind of underneath that, you've also got the likes of Airtable, which is, again, for a boutique SaaS platform, which, effectively it's a like an online spreadsheet, but got some elements of database there. So you've got this central repository, because I think that's the problem you have with the more traditional flow is that data's coming in from all different places, probably crunching it somewhere in a spreadsheet, and then they're creating a PowerPoint, and so everything is it's very linear, and then it's like, okay, you'll get another report in a month's time. But if that exec says, well, actually midway through the month I want to know how things are tracking, having that sort of always on, and it's the discipline of doing that in an online system versus doing it in offline sort of end user spreadsheet system. I think that's the other thing it comes down to, really. It's the discipline to use those tools versus and we see, I think spreadsheets are classic for that, even in massive businesses. And one of the businesses I've worked with over the last couple of years was exactly that. It was a sort of spreadsheet killer, if you like, within enterprises. So trying to remove large, complex, business critical processes off of spreadsheets. Because it's obviously inherently fraught with issues, both in terms of somebody puts in the wrong calculation. There's been plenty of horror stories of that. I have been responsible for one myself, Tim. If ever you want a market to expand into, I can highly recommend universities. They're typically 20 years behind on their use of data, and I'm sure, will my university mind me saying this, but I was sent a spreadsheet, which, to be fair to me, the people that had sent it to me had hidden the data on it, and so I didn't see it, and I gave it to my assistant to send out to students, and the students very quickly worked out that there was hidden data on it and revealed it, and it was it created tricky times for us, especially me. And I see that, I'm an external examiner at many universities, so I think there's aside from consultancy, there's a huge market there for you. Yes, well, this is it. I mean, that particular business that I've been working with was largely focused on the financial sector.
Okay. Oh God, right.
So, even in large international banking environments, you've still got a lot of things being done on spreadsheet. So yeah, I think that's that discipline to do things online, do things through a system, and make it as easy as possible. I think that's the other side of it. So the big part of any adoption. So if you're going to roll out any system, it's about adoption, isn't it? Because you could build the most beautiful product in the world, and again, that's why getting a beta version out as early as possible, testing with, this was kind of the angle that we took with that media agency in terms of do it in a spreadsheet, do it for yourself, and if it improves your management of those campaigns just by following this process, that's one win. Then share that spreadsheet with 2 other people in your business.
Yeah.
And if they come back and say, great, this has improved my campaigns, then you're just getting those proof points, and it's in a very low cost, low risk way.
Yep.
And it just gives you that I can now make the next investment. The worst thing is going away, creating something, and then nobody really uses it because everybody's like, well, I kind of do it slightly differently, and I don't want to be forced down this route. And that's why people end up going back to spreadsheets, because they're saying, well, I know all the data's there in this system that you've created. Yep. I'm just going to download a CSV and go and somewhere else offline, because that's what I'm used to working with.
Yes.
So it's, how do you make it as easy as possible for people to adopt and valuable enough for people to adopt?
Talking of simplicity, I don't know if it was you that did it, but it might have been someone you worked with. But I remember at 3 when we were designing, never seen before applications for the 3rd generation of mobile phones, and they were planning on spending an absolute fortune on various bits of software to mock things up. And some bright spark said, well, we can do this in PowerPoint. And effectively just mocked up the UX, or CX as it would be called now, on PowerPoint, with everything was hyperlinked, and it saved hundreds of thousands. I'm guessing that's your, doing things, I don't mean via PowerPoint, but rather than paying coders hundreds of thousands of pounds, there's cheaper and quicker ways to do things sometimes.
Yeah, I think there was lots of that. I wasn't involved in that particular one, but I can remember we did some stuff at 3 that was a similar thing, where we saved them a lot of money by using a different process for a recommendation engine. Actually, that was but yeah, I think PowerPoint's not going to be, or any of those sort of end user applications, those sort of personal applications, then they're never going to be scalable.
Yep.
I think to a certain extent, you have that with no code as well. So I think, a lot of enterprises obviously are adopting no code. But what they're effectively doing is saying, well, let's use this no code solution versus using a spreadsheet, or versus using, you go back even for people using like Lotus Notes to build.
Wow.
So, that you're effectively giving them better tools, and tools that ideally have been, IT approved and are easier to manage from that point of view. But you still end up with, it's that you give them all the freedom in the world. If you can give these sort of citizen developers all the freedom to create, then you'll end up with quite a lot of disparate solutions. I think that's still there's a scaling issue with.
Okay.
But it's great for doing that initial proof point. Let's see if we can, piece together a process using some no-code solutions that just prove that it's going to be valuable. And then low code is that nice sort of in-between stage where you get some engineering buy-in, but you also get the engineering discipline, which is a case of, you can't get every citizen developer in there that can go and change things. Like the spreadsheet example of unhiding cells or whatever it might be. It's like, okay, if there's certain data that we want to lock down, we can do that because we've got engineering sort of, an engineering process around the implementation of a low code solution. But obviously allows you to shortcut a lot of other areas. Yep.
The no code, low code thing is, I've not used, I've in the past, I've gone straight to coders because why is that? I was, I guess, a bit scared that the no code or low code wouldn't provide me with what I wanted, but that was based on ignorance rather than knowledge, or fear rather than knowledge. How capable are low code and no code solutions at creating relatively quick, relatively effective solutions for common challenges that a business owner might have?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think a no-code solution in the hands of somebody that knows how to use it and is confident to use it. And we often talk about the sort of the spreadsheet jockey, and it's the same. It's the same process, really, in terms of oftentimes, and when we're working in those sort of banking environments, and you go in and you find some spreadsheet that was effectively it was a system. Spreadsheet is a system, and it had been created typically by an external consultant, because they'd come in with all the knowledge, knew how to create all the macros and create this kind of amazing spreadsheet. But then they exit the building and nobody knows how to change it, and everybody's scared to death to change it because they're going, well, this crucial process over here hangs off it. But I think with I see no code in a similar vein, in terms of the right person with the right understands the business process, understands how to use the tools to create that and automate that to a certain extent, can do that. But again, the knowledge tends to be held within quite small, singular. But yeah, I think it's the same. It's the same with things like, you see it with AI, that ultimately the best use of AI is when the person that's prompting it knows what they're doing.
Yep.
So I think the same sort of applies really for no code. That you really need somebody in there that knows how it works, how to get the most out of it. But they don't have to be technical. Don't have to get into the code.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I've seen the whole range. So I've seen companies that started off as consultancies and are now SaaS firms. So they realized halfway through the process they've got their real asset was their data. And so they flipped completely to, in effect, offering data initially with them as the interface between the clients, but eventually as self-serve. So kind of flip the company. That to me seems quite rare. I've seen 2 instances of it over the last 5 years. What I see more common is, as you started off with, is consultancies, seeing they're doing the same things again and looking for a solution for that. There is, I think, a lot of consultancies are looking over their shoulder at competitors who are productizing what they're doing, and thereby saving costs and sometimes improving quality, sometimes offering clients capabilities that they might not have. And I think part of this mix is AI, and you brought it up, and I'm obviously very interested in it at the moment. How does AI fit into this mix? Because it seems, from my perspective, I'm seeing a lot of firms using it for tasks, sort of not strategically, not systemically, but it'll be a consultant who's doing a workshop. They'll think, what can AI come up with, or finish this blog post or finish this report. I haven't seen many use cases, or I have seen 2 or 3, but I haven't seen many use cases where it's sort of more of a strategic investment by the firm. What are you seeing on your side?
I think that sort of parallel pathing with AI is I'm seeing a lot. So as you say, helping with tasks, it's I'm doing this thing anyway. It's going to work faster if I've got AI doing elements of it. We use it within our teams at Axioned. The engineering team have been using it for a long time. So it sort of completing some of the coding and or suggesting what the code should be for a certain interaction and things like that. Again, senior engineer gets it, uses it, knows when it's made a mistake and fixes it. Junior engineers, it's dangerous. It's a dangerous thing because they don't they're not experienced enough to spot when they makes the error. and things like testing and QA, that obviously is, setting up automated tests of websites and apps and things like that. Then it's really good at writing test scripts, and AI is great at that because, again, it's fairly repeatable stuff. So yeah, I think everybody should be using it. I'm saying to my kids, at school, doing GCSEs and A levels, I'm like, you've got to do it. You've got to use it. You're going to get left behind. And although it's sort of frowned upon, obviously, from the point of view of education, I'm like, you need to know your subject. So you still need to learn what you're supposed to be doing, but get it to write your first draft. If you're revising, get it to write your flashcards, things like that, because it's a time saver. In terms of more, a lot of the businesses that we work with and I work with are very much, it's process driven, building out systems to support a process. So AI, again, because everybody wants to know, it's the question everybody's asking, and saying, yes, I spoke to someone yesterday. It's like the and finally question on every call I go on to. It's like, the final story news round, everybody's like, and finally, what are you doing with AI? If I'm speaking to a client, or I'm speaking to a potential client. And I would say that you need to be looking at it from the point of view of, yes, if you're working with lots of data, then start looking at how AI interprets that. But run it in parallel. You don't necessarily need to integrate it fully into the system yet. And we're doing that with a couple of clients at the moment, where we are taking data sets that they're working with. We're running them through some language models to maybe analyze analyze text for context and information. And we might create something like what you call like an AI workbench. So it's an area where they can go in and actually analyze what's happening and spot where it's gone wrong and maybe tell it where it's gone wrong. So that's like saying, well, you can expose your data to these systems. And I think, that's going to become even more prevalent, because there's been obviously a concern about exposing data to them because of the privacy and security, but that's now being solved. So OpenAI have now announced this sort of they're called GPTs, so private versions of ChatGPT. So for anyone, they can have it in-house, which I think is really the right thing to do, because you can within banking and pharmaceuticals and anything where you've got secret content or highly sensitive content. So I think you are going to see it being used more and more. So I would just say to anybody that's in any industry, quite frankly,
yes, I agree,
should be running it in parallel and seeing how it performs and how it can improve your own workflows or your own productivity. And it is, I think it's incredibly powerful. As a sort of anecdotally, we've got a good friend who's a child psychologist. She's quite high up in what she does, and often speaks at conferences and things like that about the subject matter that she's expert in. And we were at a dinner party recently, and she was sort of asking about AI and ChatGPT, and mentioned that she'd got a big conference coming up and she'd got to write a 30-minute presentation. She said, so she's always saying it's always the hardest thing is sitting down and getting that first draft. She goes, I just need to be disciplined and clear a Sunday afternoon, and I'll go and lock myself in my study and do it. And we flippantly over the dinner table said, why don't you what's the subject? And she sort of set out this long complicated subject, plugged it into ChatGPT, and she was just blown away. And this is very, very top of her game. Was blown away by the first draft that it came back with, and she was like, that's probably saved me 4 hours. I think there's it's incredibly whether it's quite the Elon Musk sort of state of killing us all off and chasing us up trees and things. I think, you know, that's I'm probably more on the side of, you know, it should make us more efficient, more effective, and hopefully give us more time for doing the things we enjoy versus doing the things that take up time that don't necessarily need to. Yeah, I think that's my only my main advice is, yeah, just you've got to work with it and see how it applies.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for experimentation, isn't there? And I know experimentation takes time, but there's a lot that can be done with AI just simply by, you know, practicing prompts. You know, put one prompt in. If that doesn't work, add something, take something out. Keep playing with it till you're happy. And especially now the context windows are so huge that you can actually, you know, you can provide very detailed prompts and lots of resources, especially with these GPTs, which is an awful name, by the way. But these are, you know, personal bots that we can create now. I'm guessing it's going.
I think controls as well. That the interesting thing about that is the control of the data set that goes in. So if you are, I'm speaking to another business actually in the education space, so this will be interesting from a university point of view. So as an assistant to students, it could be that actually there's a vast array of information that they could draw upon, whether it's about, you know, things to do locally, access to certain things through the university, things to do with their subject. You know, you could control the data set that informs that bot. That means that, you know, they can ask it anything. It means they don't have to go trawling through document after document to find that information. I think that's the thing that, again, is really powerful, that, you know, if you can say, well, actually, within this context, I need to know this information. And I don't want to be, you know, it's because the problem with it being totally open is the hallucinations. So things that didn't happen. And because it's sort of, you know, creates a story based on information it's found here and saying, well, this is the most likely outcome, therefore I'll tell you that. But actually that isn't the real truth. So I think, you know, the control that will come with it, in terms of, you know, both in terms of how it needs to be controlled and needs to be, you know, from a governmental and you know, just societal point of view, but also from the point of view going, actually, I need to know that in this context, what I'm getting back is based on information that I trust and rely on, and you know, I see it as being very, you know, very powerful for that. And
it's not really the focus of the podcast, but, you know, you're a bright guy that's immersed in this area, so I'd love to know your view on it. One thing that worries me is that at the moment, ChatGPT 4 Plus or Turbo, whichever version you've got access to, with very little training, will provide an answer to most business questions that an analyst or a junior consultant would. I have no doubt in a year or two that it will get to the consultant, perhaps even senior consultant level, especially if you have put some of your own data and some of your own content into either vector databases, or have fine-tuned the software. And this also applies to students, you know. And, you know, I'm encouraging my students to use it. But what happens to that critical thinking that allows you to know whether or not something is wrong or could be improved or it's got the wrong end of the stick? I'm thinking, you know, it would be so easy now for a junior consultant to save themselves a day a week by plugging stuff in. Content comes out, great, present it. As ChatGPT 4 becomes GPT 5, 6, 7, whatever, it gets better and better. And in 5 years' time, perhaps you've got a senior consultant or even a principal consultant or a student at the university who has produced very good stuff and the clients are reasonably happy with it, but hasn't ever had to write a report themselves, or never had to write an essay from beginning to end, and therefore, maybe I'm just sounding old, therefore can't can't spot weaknesses and haven't got that level of critical thinking? I don't know.
Yeah, it's because part of me, I think, for those sort of junior level roles, and certainly you look at, junior lawyers, that's, you just think there's a and I think, it's been widely reported, when you look at the sort of jobs that are most at threat, lawyers is pretty close to the top of the list. A lot on research and finding precedents, and that can be done by AI in seconds. So yeah, again, going back to my kids, you worry about what the future is for them and how they form their careers, whichever way they go. I'm trying to encourage them to go into the creative industries for that reason. But I think consultancies and similar to the work that I do, maybe I'm just being blinkered to it and trying to sort of convince myself that I'm going to be useful in 5 years' time. But I think it's still a people business. It's still about, there's the nuance of conversation that happens between humans. I was speaking to an education business yesterday who works with they do like careers advice within schools, and that's part of what they do. But they were saying, obviously somebody can go and plug in information. A child can go to ChatGPT and get careers advice.
Yep.
I said, yeah, but it's not about the advice really. It's about the ability of the advisor to extract the information from that child that is going to give them a sense of actually, what do you really want to do? So it goes back to the prompt. It's like, if you don't know how to prompt it, and sometimes you need somebody there to be coaching you really to get the information out of you. And I think consultancies are in a similar position whereby it's your end client is really, how do you coach the information out of this to make sure that what you then deliver meets their needs, but also meets their kind of meets the needs of the business, but also meets the needs of them as a person. In the same way as we talk about adoption, if we talk about adoption of technology, you've got to understand the human side of that. Because yes, you could put together the most perfect system in the world, adopt it because they'd rather do it the way they've always done it, or there's other they won't change. But it's only through the coaching and the human side where you can understand what those things are, and you can find those pain points.
Yes, I think that's a very good insight, and I think there's lessons there for business schools, consultancies, your friend the child psychologist, that actually I guess it's going back to the old consultancy thing, that the skills that really matter are the interpersonal skills, communication, persuasion, and the stuff that AI is going to be, technically, I'm sure there's no reason why it can't do it, but emotionally engaging with the person is still, fortunately, our default preference, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's it. And I think, I guess bringing it back to that sort of software development, that we started talking about really in product development, and a lot of the work that I do personally, and a lot of the way that I try to encourage our technical team in particular is that it's more of the human side of, if a client asks you a question or asks for a certain piece of functionality, it's a really understanding the why behind that.
Okay.
Is that really what you're asking for? If you're making a technical decision or you're making a request around a certain piece of functionality, you've got to understand the motivation for that, because it might be that they don't have enough knowledge about the technology to ask for the right. And it might be that actually when you boil it down and get to the root cause of why they've asked for it, it could be something totally different. And so there's the human side is I think is right for everybody. And software engineers are probably that classic of being, they'll deal with what's in front of them, they can deal with a problem, and they'll work in the code and maybe not so much on the human side. And when you find the ones that can span that, then they typically are the ones that rise to the sort of CTO levels.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you, Tim. Listen, how can listeners find out more about you and Axioned?
So, well, Axioned is Axioned spelt with an X, so it's Axioned. So yeah, obviously there's a website and LinkedIn. I'm not a massive social media user, so I've not got an active Twitter feed or anything like that. X feed, should I say? But yeah, you find me on LinkedIn, Tim Redgate. There's not many Tim Redgates in the world, so I'm quite easy to find.
Okay. Well, I'll put all the links in the show notes, and also to the Zapier, ServiceNow, Basecamp, and Airtable are systems that you've mentioned. So I'll put them in as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they would just there's loads more, but they were the ones that sort of off the top of my head. But yeah, happy to follow up, and if anybody's got questions, absolutely.
Brilliant. Thanks for your time, Tim.
Thanks, Joe. Good to speak. Good to see you.
Take care.